Okay, so welcome to the podcast, Martin Jones.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on. So you work in quite a specific niche kind of area, don't you? For our listeners and viewers, what's your background? What's your expertise?
Sure. So thanks for having me. Great to be here. So yeah, my name is Martin. I'm a sport and exercise psychologist by training. So spent early part of my career specializing in working with athletes and in high performers in that realm, and have gradually moved away from elite sport and now have a job working with again elite performers, but in the defense and security sector.
Wow. Yeah. So you're a doctor and a scientist.
yeah. So I've got I'm a PhD doctor, so I can talk you through how to set goals and how to run some statistics. But if anyone has a heart attack in front of me, I'm no use to talk. But yeah, I did my PhD in sports psychology at Loughborough. Graduated 2008, I think it was, and then my career took me across over to Canada. Worked at a university in Canada teaching and researching and working with athletes. Did some work with parents and coaches and performance directors, and then spent a big chunk of my career working in higher education. Again, like I say, three things really: being a teacher, being a researcher, and being a practitioner. And after around about 15 years of doing that, an opportunity came up to move into the defense sector. And it was one of those cases, or one of those times, where I just thought to myself, I like the sound of this challenge. I wasn't sure whether it would be the right thing, but it felt risky, but it felt like a good risk. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to try this, and moved across into a research role that's opened up all kinds of doors, really, both working in the UK with the defense industry in the UK, but also beyond, working across different alliances that the UK is part of, and learning about human performance from some of the world leading experts across the in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, and New Zealand, and across Europe. So it's been a great opportunity, and I've really enjoyed it.
You're well travelled.
Yeah.
So as far as sort of the thing that I want to talk to you about tonight, sleep. What the way that your sort of research that you did into it, did that kind of transfer quite neatly from doing it from sort of a sport background to the sort of defense, where you sort of optimizing performance of people in hostile environments? Is how transferable was that? Well,
it's kind of a strange one, because I started off, I did a sports science degree initially, and then specialized as a psychologist. So as a sport and exercise scientist, I learned about nutrition, I learned about training methods, about physiology, about biomechanics, how the body works, how the mind works, how the brain works, all that kind of stuff. And it's a broad subject. You learn about how to train people to be power athletes, how to train people to be endurance athletes, all these kind of things. And it wasn't until I started working in defense when this idea of sleep as a pillar of performance really presented itself. So up to that point, I'd never really thought about it. But the reason that it came up was we were just thinking about, like, if you think about the cognitive components of performance, like how do you get people thinking better? How do you get people performing better cognitively? So we put out a flip chart and say, well, what could we do? What are the ideas? Where can we go? And you might say, well, there might be certain nutritional supplements, or there might be new technologies. There's certain headbands that supposedly can change brainwaves, all this kind of stuff, all these different technologies. And we started looking at each of those and thinking about those, and thinking, well, if we take just a given cognitive function, like say reaction time, if I take a certain supplement, like how better will I get? What's the size of the effect? And we went through all of those things, and it was a real light bulb moment where there was a realization that if you're sleep deprived, and then you get adequate sleep, the size of the effect is enormous. Like the improvement that you can make in a lot of these cognitive faculties is enormous. It's so much bigger than any of these technologies. And then you start to think, well, buying this brand new headband that, you know, these grandiose claims about what it can do, but it's say £2,000. Think, well, how much does it cost to go to sleep? You know, it doesn't, assuming you've got a bed, you know, or even if you don't, if you're tired enough, you'll sleep on a concrete floor. But you know, it's something that we do every day. We've evolved to sleep. It's something that doesn't cost anything. It doesn't really require much effort for the most part, as you know, assuming you're healthy, and you get these huge effects. So that was the light bulb moment. It was like, well, surely, like, this is a fundamental building block, you know, foundation of human performance that I had overlooked as a practitioner for many, many years. And the more I've delved into it, it's just this, you know, this revelation really, that if you sleep well compared to restricting your sleep, sleeping well makes you perform so much better consistently for longer.
So how was that implemented then? Say if you were sort of working with athletes and then working with people in high stress environments, how do you sort of go about making a positive change for them by introducing, what interventions do you use?
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. So fundamentally, as I said before, we all sleep. So me doing nothing, you will go to sleep tonight. It's a biological requirement. You know, if you think of what are our basic human needs, what do we need to survive? We need air, we need water, we need warmth, we need fuel, and we need sleep. And if you don't have those, if you remove any one of those things, you will die. You know, you cannot sustain life in the absence of sleep, air, water, food, warmth. You know, it's just not possible to live. So to an extent, I almost don't need to do anything because evolution has looked after it for me. You will go to sleep. But sleep's a strange one in that we need to place the need for sleep in the socio-cultural context that means that sleep is sometimes devalued. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. So if you look at there's all these streaming services that are available online, and the big one, you know, that most people have or have seen is Netflix, but there are others. So if I said to you, you know, what's Netflix's, you know, biggest where's their competition, who are they competing against? And you know, you might say, I don't know, Amazon Prime, Apple, whatever. The CEO of Netflix was asked that question. He said his biggest competitor is sleep. So he is trying to keep people from falling asleep so they can watch Netflix. So we live in a world, you know, we've got artificial light that means we can stay awake later. We've got distractions like our smart devices. We've got things like Netflix that are keeping us awake. So the fundamental intervention, what I do more often than not is, first and foremost, try and help people understand that one, sleep is a pillar of performance. It will make you perform better if you use that time, you know, if you use your time to sleep, and to just prioritize and value sleep as something that shouldn't be thrown away on a whim. So you can sometimes get this erroneous belief that if I only sleep 4 hours, I can be more productive. I can use that time to do things. You know, I can be answering emails into early morning, or I've even heard of some people who wake up in the middle of the night and do a training session and then go and try and go back to sleep. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, they're doing it almost for the right reasons. They think it's performance enhancing, but the truth is sleep is performance enhancing. So it's trying to get people to really understand that it is, that doing nothing and sleeping is making you better. It's helping you recover. You don't, it's the old adage. I remember my old strength and conditioning lecturers who always used to say, you don't build muscle in the gym, you build muscle when you recover. Like you have to have that rest and recovery period, and that's what sleep is doing. It's just trying to win people over to actually understand and believe that sleep is helping them.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that's exactly the same with training for running, for ultra running, or any form of running. It's not about the session, the workout that you do. That's if you don't recover from it, and your body won't adapt to that training if you don't give it a chance to recover. So that it all the magic happens in the recovery. Yeah. So sleep. So as far as sleep is concerned, then, I mean, this is something that I've said, if I could buy extra hours of sleep, I would. I value sleep so much, because it's not that I don't get enough, because I'm quite regimented with my sleep, and my whole family know that 10 o'clock that's me done for the night. It's a rare occasion if I'm staying up late, it's for a good reason, but 10 o'clock, it's, that's it, game over. And the wife often sort of, doesn't like the fact that I'm basically, I'll just get up and I'll walk upstairs and that's it, game over, I'm going to bed. But as far as that's probably because in my normal life, when I'm working and training as well for ultramarathons. But as far as like a normal, not that I'm saying that I'm not a normal person goes, how important is, because I've got friends that say, well, I survive on that 6 hours a night and I function on that, I'm okay, and that's all I need. I'm trying to think of the word, I can't even say biologically, that's the word. Are we all different as far as how much sleep we need, or do we all need 7 hours or 8 hours or 9 hours?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll answer that question with a question. What size shoe are you?
8.5.
Okay, 8.5. I'm a size 10. Okay. What's the average? What's the national average shoe size if you had to guess?
9, is it?
9. Let's say 9. So these, if you think of like limb length or shoe length, there's variability in a population. Everyone's got a different size nose. Everyone's got different size hands. There's variability in almost every biological process, and sleep is no different. So if we look at the average across a population, you see it on what we call a normal distribution of what's called a bell curve. So the average is round about 8 hours. So that's that mean. But with a bell curve, that tells us that there's a load of people who sit left of the mean, and there's a load of people who sit to the right of the mean. So roughly around about 60% of the population-ish are on that sort of 8 hours. But if we take a range of either side, round about sort of 70-ish% of the population will sit within what we call a standard deviation of the mean, which basically means between about 6-ish to 9 hours. That's where the vast majority of the people in the UK population, or even the world, arguably, will need somewhere between 6 and 9. There are some people who, just like shoe size, you might find someone who's got a size 16 shoe. It's really rare, but they do exist. We know they exist, but it's super rare. It's not like you're going to walk down the high street and say, see these people with these enormous feet. And it's similarly, it's really rare that you'll see people who are the extremes of that distribution. So people who can survive on 3 hours a night, they probably exist, but they are, they're golden unicorns. They're so rare. You'll probably never meet one of those people in your lives. Equally, people who need 14 hours, they're very, very, very rare. So most people will exist somewhere in the middle of that distribution, round about 6, maybe 7, depending on who you ask, to 9 hours. So yeah, if you're getting less than 5, you're probably sleep restricting yourself. You probably need more. And there's been some research that we can test people, and you get that individual who claims that I can get by on 4 hours, but when you actually objectively test their performance, that you look at their reaction time, their vigilance, their working memory, a lot of these cognitive functions, you see that they are not performing well at all. So they convince themselves that they're okay. Maybe they don't feel sleepy, but they do not perform as well.
Yeah, they're just getting by with the minimum.
Yeah, and it gets to a point where it's just your new baseline. So just getting like that, one of the common things that you see with sleep deprivation, it's very similar to alcohol, in that if you think of, that individual that you see at the pub who's had 3 pints and they're like, I'm fine, give me the car keys, I can drive home, I don't feel drunk, I'm not impaired. And what they've lost by being in alcohol, having the alcohol, being impaired, what they've lost is their recognition of how impaired they are. Like they don't realize how impaired they are. It's the same thing with sleep restriction. The first thing to go is, we call it a metacognitive skill. So thinking about thinking. They're not self-aware enough to know how impaired they are. And then your reaction time, your vigilance, your psychomotor skills, they're all diminished, but with sleep restriction. But that individual is saying, I'm fine, I'm okay. And effectively what they're just getting used to that standard. That's just their normal. So yeah, then what often happens is, when they get that full restorative proper sleep, it's like the grass is greener and the sky's bluer and everything tastes nicer, and they don't realize how impaired they were until they start getting the good quality sleep again.
So do you think there's like a good portion of the population that just get by and are just sort of muddling through with what sleep they've got, and they could do with optimizing their sleep then?
I think yes, to a degree. There's a lot of books that you can read. There's a famous one called Why We Sleep by Matt Walker. Some of your listeners probably read it. And it can be a bit catastrophic at times, and there's talk of this sleep deprivation epidemic. And I'm not sure whether I'd be that grandiose, or I'm not sure whether I buy into the extreme sort of headlines that are sold. I do think a lot of people could optimize their sleep. I think they could get better. That's not to say that. I think the catastrophic side of things is more to do with health. It's as if I'm a short sleeper, I'm more likely to die young, or I'm more likely to get Alzheimer's disease or cardiovascular disease, where the lack of sleep probably contributes to those illnesses, but they're so complex as to why someone gets Alzheimer's disease that we can't say just sleep. It's a whole raft of things. But I think that people can optimize their sleep. And I think if anyone is sat there listening who is listening to this podcast at 2 a.m, or they know that they regularly will get to a point where they feel tired, but they're just like, oh, just one more episode. Those individuals are cannibalizing their sleep opportunity. They are robbing themselves of the physiological and psychological benefits of restorative sleep. They're impairing themselves because they want to watch another episode of Game of Thrones. So we have evolved to sleep, unquestionably. Every single organism, or every animal on the planet, from the simplest microscopic nematode worm and fruit fly to humans, elephants, birds, fish, we've evolved sleep. We have not evolved to watch Netflix. So biologically, we have to sleep. It's not a luxury item. It is a fundamental biological need. And if we don't do it, we just don't perform. And I would go as far to say is there's nothing that we do whilst awake that is improved by sleep restriction. Everything is diminished by not getting sufficient sleep.
So other than cancelling our Netflix subscriptions, what practically can we do then to sort of optimize our sleep then on a practical scale?
Yeah, so we can break things down. We can look at people who maybe are restricting their sleep because of a choice, that they're doing it because they are choosing to do something else. You've got another group of people who maybe have got restricted sleep because of a medical problem, so a sleep disorder. So the answer is different for different people. So if we, first off, people who've got a diagnosable sleep disorder, and what I mean by that is things like insomnia, just the inability to initiate sleep or maintain sleep. And it could be, waking up super early in the morning. It could be things like restless leg syndrome. You've got that urge to move your limbs, things like narcolepsy or cataplexy, sleep apnea, parasomnias like sleepwalking or sleep talking. Now, these are medical issues. So if you've got restricted sleep, if you've got a very short sleep window because of you're trying to sleep but can't because of insomnia, or you've got very fragmented sleep because you've got sleep apnea and keep waking up, then go to your GP. First and foremost, it's a medical issue. It's most of these disorders are highly treatable through either behavioral techniques or sometimes some drugs, or in the case of sleep apnea, we can use a technology called CPAP, or continuous positive airway pressure that opens up your airway. So highly treatable. So you can positively improve your sleep that way. If you're one of the people who doesn't have sleep disorder and you're just looking to optimize your sleep, a lot of it is relative common sense. We can think of it behaviorally. So what are we doing in the daytime that's potentially impeding our sleep in the nighttime? And if we think about how we sleep, it's really quite an elegant, beautiful biological process that involves two systems. One of them is what we call a sleep pressure or sleep drive, and the other is your circadian rhythm. So your sleep pressure builds throughout the day as long as you're awake. So and that's what we call a homeostatic drive, and it's similar to other homeostatic drives like thirst. So if you're thirsty, the drive to drink or your thirst builds up throughout the day if you don't drink, and then once you take a sip of a liquid, you drink, you quench that thirst, and you're no longer thirsty. Sleep's the same. While you're awake, it builds. Then when you sleep, you quench that sleep thirst. Your sleep pressure drops, and then you start the next day, and it builds again. So it builds up, it drops at sleep, it builds up. That builds as long as you're awake. Your circadian rhythm is effectively keeping you awake. So when the sun is up, there's things happening in your brain that is keeping you alert, keeping you awake, and that circadian rhythm goes up and down. So we have what we call it the postprandial dip, but it's actually got nothing to do with food. It's not. It happens usually after lunch, but that's your circadian rhythm just dipping away. Then it builds up again, then it dips again. So when that circadian alerting system is down, it's usually at the same time that your sleep pressure is built up, and you've got this golden window where you've got a high sleep drive, a low circadian alerting system, and you fall asleep. Now, what can happen with some people is their behaviors throughout the day can have a negative influence on one of those two systems. So sleep drive, for example, there's various chemicals in your body, in your brain that are responsible for that sleep drive, and one of them is the very well researched one is adenosine. Adenosine it accumulates, or it's in your brain. So we can sometimes consume psychoactive stimulants that block that adenosine, and the main one is caffeine. Caffeine stops the effect of adenosine, and that's why we have that alertness. So if we're drinking loads of caffeine, we're effectively stopping that sleep pressure building up sufficiently, so that at that point when our circadian rhythm has dipped, our sleep drive isn't high enough and we stay awake. So that's one thing. Like, when are you consuming caffeine, and how much caffeine are you consuming? We can think about other things that might influence sleep pressure, like nicotine is another one that's a stimulant, but napping. So napping in the daytime, taking a nap will blunt your sleep pressure. Now, naps are great. I love a nap, but you don't do it at 10 o'clock at night, an hour before you think you want to go to bed. You need to think about, when do you time your naps? So midday-ish, so that gives you the rest of the afternoon to allow your sleep pressure to rebuild. And again, 20 minutes, you're not sleeping for 3 hours in the middle of the day, because you'll blunt that sleep pressure and you won't be able to fall asleep later in the evening.
Sorry to cut in. Is that in line with when your circadian rhythm dips during the afternoon? So is that why an afternoon like siesta is like a natural thing that people do around the world?
It's easy to fall asleep because you do have that circadian dip. So yeah, it's easy to do in the mid-afternoon for sure. So there are certain behaviors, I say behavioral things that we do, things that we consume, that are influencing that sleep drive system. But then the same thing is true of your circadian rhythm, that our circadian rhythm, we have what we call an endogenous rhythm. And what I mean by that is, if I put you in a cave with no light, constant conditions, constant temperature, your rhythm will still tick along, your body clock will tick on its own. But what it does is it will probably tick a bit, it won't be exactly 24 hours, it'll just be over. So your circadian rhythm is a bit like a faulty grandfather clock that just runs slightly fast. So what you do every day with a clock that runs a little bit fast, is you set it every day. You open the door, you get your key out and you set that clock. We do that with our bodies. So we call it entrainment. We entrain our circadian rhythm to the environment that we're in. And the strongest entraining factor, we call these Zeitgebers or time givers. The strongest one is light. So making sure that you're getting good quality light exposure into your eyes. And the reason is there's a type of cell in your retina. It's like a solar panel, basically. It's a relatively recently discovered type of cell that sits in your retina, and it has a direct route into a part of your brain called the suprachiasmatic nuclei, which is the master clock of your circadian rhythm. So getting light in there is firing that part of your brain. It's then this biochemical cascade, which is saying, right, it's daytime, it's wake time. Let's get these bodily processes going. So if we don't get light early in the morning, we're not setting that clock. Equally, if we get light, high intensity light at the wrong time of day, so high, like more in the evening, that can affect it. Or if we're eating at the wrong time of the day, that has an effect on our circadian rhythm. So for the most people who maybe, if you're looking to optimize your sleep, you need to think, well, what am I doing whilst I'm awake that potentially has a negative influence on my sleep? And then it's just it's common sense. Right? If I'm drinking loads of caffeine at 10 o'clock at night, that's not going to improve my sleep. You might be one of these people who thinks, I can drink an espresso at night and it doesn't affect me. You might not get the alertness boost of caffeine anymore because you're habituated, you're effectively addicted to caffeine, but it probably does affect the quality of the sleep stages. So you don't notice it, but it doesn't mean it's not affecting you. So that's the kind of thing I'd take people through some of their daily behaviors and allow them to understand, right, that is potentially not really going to improve your sleep and your performance. That's also, another thing that's going to thwart your performance. So let's consider, are there alternatives that we could start introducing?
Do you buy into follow lots of people on social media that are sort of into biohacking, and I don't know if that's a dirty word to you, biohacking, but and they have lots of different routines that they do for their sort of sleep hygiene, as far as like turning off Wi-Fi at night and getting direct sunlight, which that isn't always an easy thing for us Brits, is it, to set your circadian rhythm by the sun rising, because a lot of the times we don't see the sunrise, do we? We just see clouds and rain. So like with the clocks changing this past weekend, and your circadian rhythm. Is this something that we sort of should be all having, those alarm clocks that have like the dome on with the artificial sunrise? Is that something that, can we use technology to sort of not biohack, but sort of give us the environment that we probably would have if we lived like we should do outdoors, or not living in insulated houses inside, away from natural light?
Yeah. So you can biohack, if that's if you use that term. So these therapy lamps, these light therapy lamps. I mean, I actually have one right here that I can show you. I mean, they look like this. It's just a simple box, looks like an iPad, but that kicks out a very high intensity light. So what they are useful in certain environments. I used that one when I was traveling to America, so I was using it to help trade my circadian rhythm to US time and avoid jet lag. So I use it to actually to help set my rhythms, and I don't get jet lagged when I travel. So you can use it. These sort of devices, we use a number. We use a term called lux. And specifically there's something called melanopic lux. So melanin is a pigment in those special cells that I mentioned that like that solar panel. So the intensity, the melanopic lux of the light, for it to entrain your rhythm, has to be a certain intensity. And also we know that blue wavelength light is particularly effective at entraining your rhythm. So if I take out my light, this one puts out 10,000 lux at 10 centimeters. So it's literally holding it in front of my face. Now, if I just go outside, even on a cloudy, British, horrible day, midwinter, the quality of natural outside light is sufficient. Well, it is better than this device here. Even on the most cloudy, minging day, you will get high enough intensity natural light to entrain your rhythm. It's much higher than you think. So we can, if you have a light meter on your phone, you can measure the lux levels of your environment. You go into a normal office, so somewhere like this, like an artificially lit room, we're probably looking at maybe 150 lux, something like that. It's really quite low. If you go outside, even on, let's say, in a pretty dank, grey British winter's day, it's going to be in the thousands. It's probably going to be probably at least 10,000. If you go out in midsummer, it's hundreds of thousands of lux. So yes, you can use technology, but you don't need it. You just don't need it. Just being outside for half an hour in the morning is sufficient. Getting that high quality light in your eyes. And if you go out in the morning, as the sun you don't have to see the sunrise, but just earlier on in the morning, because the sun is coming up, it's not at its brightest. So don't stare at the sun. That's not a good thing to do, but it's actually quite a warming light, and you get that level to help entrain your rhythm. So yeah, you don't need the technology. It's useful, like I say, for things like jet lag. When I was in the States, I'm waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. There is no natural light outside. It's pitch black, but I'm trying to entrain my rhythm. So that's why I use that lamp.
Yeah, I know. I went to the States in this past summer, and you can't get away. Well, obviously, yeah, you're showing the way that you can get away from it, but just being wide awake at 4 o'clock in the morning, and there's nothing you can do about it because that's your body clocks. So how would you approach that then? What's your way of approaching sort of transatlantic travel? What's your go-to for sort of getting ahead of yourself with jet lag?
Yeah, sure. So your circadian rhythm, it takes approximately 1 day per 1 hour of time zone change for you to readjust. So if I move 5 hours back, going from the UK to, say, New York, it would take me 5 days just being in that environment for me to adjust. So if you're going out for a race, for example, and you are traveling from the UK to California, which is say 9 hours, you'd need 9 days acclimatization. Now that's expensive. Like you're talking about your hotels, that's adding a significant amount of money onto your race bill. So what we can do is, while we're still in the UK, you can shift your circadian rhythm to your destination by using things like light. So we can set up a system where you can shift your body clock in either direction, forward or backward, quite effectively, quite quickly. So by using these light boxes at the appropriate time, we can what we call it phase delay or phase advance our clocks, so that when we land in California, our circadian rhythm is already entrained to that environment. So we don't need 9 days of acclimatization. We could race that day. We could race if we needed to. Just for most people, it's way easier to go sort of in a westward direction. It's for most people, and me included, it's much harder to come back the other way. But we could do the same thing using these technologies to phase delay or phase advance our clocks. There are other you can use melatonin. I don't recommend that. It doesn't work for everybody. You have to get it on prescription in this country. I don't use melatonin. I don't recommend melatonin. I think using light is sufficient. It's relatively quick. You could do it within about a week before you travel.
So how does that sort of affect your sleep pattern? So if you're sort of preparing to go to, say, the States and get on their time zone, does that completely mess you up pre you going out there?
No, it's quite subtle. So you don't, it's not like, you try and one day you're waking up at 8 o'clock in the morning, then the next day you're setting your alarm for 3 o'clock in the morning. It's not that kind of leap. You do it over a week, over a number of days, where you will, it's things like you will just shift your bedtime or by maybe 15 minutes, but it will be things like, if you're moving from UK to US, it might be that you're using something like the light therapy box in the evenings. So you're like, because it's daytime in New York at say at 10 o'clock at night in the UK when it's dark, it's 5 o'clock in the US where it's still light. So you might be using that light box to try and pull your circadian rhythm away. So yeah, it is 15 minutes per day ish, or half an hour, and you're just using those boxes, that light exposure, to gradually shift your circadian rhythm to the destination where you're going to travel. Yeah, it definitely works. There's tons of research. I've done it personally. I've assisted people who are doing like Ironmans in Texas, and they use this technology, and it's helped them. So it's a simple, these boxes, I think this cost maybe 30-40 quid. It's not a super expensive technology. And you once you've got one, you can use it over and over again. It's not really a consumable. Once you've got it, it's there. It's just about trying to have a plan in place, and it's just like a training plan. It's exactly like having a training plan, but it's a jet lag plan. It's an acclimatization plan.
Yeah. So while we've got you on and you're the expert, I want to sort of drill down into a couple of things that I want to sort of pick your brains on. So one of the things that comes up a lot is, so a few guys that I coach for ultramarathons, and I've got a couple of guys doing the spine race this year. So if you heard of the spine race, obviously running from Edale in Derbyshire all the way up to, just over the border in Scotland. And obviously sleep is going to be an issue. And we've talked about different techniques for strategies, and some of the things that come up with anecdotal kind of evidence is people sort of saying that they will always go through on a long effort like that, always go through the first 24 hours without sleep, and then sleep on the second night and time it so that it's in line with your circadian rhythm, so that you would go to sleep on the second night and then hopefully kind of wake up along with your circadian rhythm on the second day. Does that make sense, or is that something that we shouldn't be trying to do? Or
no, that makes sense. So what we in the short term, what I'd say is, number one, do not start that race sleep deprived. So you should be, we call it sleep banking or sleep extension.
Another one of my questions.
Yeah. If you know you're about to be sleep restricted, make sure that you have cleared away your sleep debt, that you are starting that race fresh. You've had for the week before, if you know that you typically get 8 hours, give yourself a 9 hours time in bed opportunity for that whole week. Just make sure you're getting the best sleep you can before you start. So yeah, then once you're in that race, 24 hours of wakefulness is doable. I know I've done that, didn't enjoy it, but I have done it. I've stayed awake for 24 hours. I mean, I've got young kids, like most young parents at some point have probably had a 24-hour period of their child crying and not being able to sleep. So it is possible. We know that at that point that the level of impairment of 24 hours of sleep deprivation is equivalent to being legally drunk. So there's a risk there that if there's any safety critical decision making that you have to make at 24 hours, you are at risk that you might make a really bad decision. So if there's a way of mitigating that, if you've got a team around you, if there's a support structure that means that you're not putting yourself at risk, then you should use that if you can. The evidence suggests that you can probably stay awake for about 48 hours with caffeine. Like, caffeine could probably keep you ticking over for about 48 hours, no sleep at all, with a lot of caffeine. After which, caffeine's just not going to help you anymore. You'll be so tired that it's not going to do anything. So trying to stay awake for 24 hours is possible, and having it, trying to fit your sleep around your circadian rhythm is a really good idea. So you will fall asleep after 24 hours. You will fall asleep if it's the middle of the day. You'll be really tired, but it'll be really fragmented sleep. And we see this with shift workers, people who work nights, is they're super tired because they've been awake for hours, and they're trying to fall asleep when that endogenous rhythm is peaking, it's building in the morning. So your body is saying, get up, be awake. So if you do find yourself trying to sleep in the daytime, you might find it harder than sleeping at night. But if you have to do that, if the nature of the race or where you are at the time means that is the only time you can sleep, then eye masks just block the light out completely. But yeah, it makes better sense to try and sleep when your circadian rhythm is telling you to sleep, which is the nighttime.
So another thing that I read a book recently about somebody who was doing the Wainwrights round, so running all the peaks in the Lake District and going for the record for that. And what she was saying was that she was taking sort of trail naps, as far as like if there was a support vehicle there, she would sleep in it, but she would only ever sleep for 2 hours maximum, because she believed that anything over 2 hours, she didn't want to go into what she termed as restorative sleep. So when your body starts to repair itself and goes in, is that a thing, or is that kind of just something that she's kind of made up herself, that if you sleep at a certain time, that your body starts to go into repair mode rather than just nap mode?
Yeah, it is a thing, but I mean, it sounds like she's maybe misunderstood a little bit. So sleep is not one thing. It's like the analogy that I've used before is it's like your diet. So if you look at nutrition, you look at what's a rounded diet. And I don't want to get into discussion about the benefits of carbohydrates or ketones, but let's just say, for the most part, if you ask most dietitians and nutritionists, they will say you need a balance of carbohydrates, some fats, some proteins, and then micronutrient content. So a good meal will have each of those things. And if you don't have one of those things, Like if you don't have protein in your diet, there's a physiological consequence of that. Sleep is like nutrition. Like each of your sleep stages, you've got what we call REM sleep and NREM sleep, non-REM sleep. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, non-REM and REM sleep. Each of those stages they do different things for your body, for your brain, for your cognitive abilities. They are different. If you rob yourself of one of those stages, there will be a physiological consequence. So what we know is that the stages go in roughly a 90-minute cycle. So you'll start in stage 1, and then you gradually get deeper into stage 2, then into stage 3, we call stage 3 slow wave or deep sleep. And then you cycle into a period of REM, rapid eye movement sleep, 90 minutes, and then it starts again. But the duration of each stage is not consistent across the whole night. So the first sleep cycle, you will probably get a lot more slow wave sleep than REM sleep. By 8 hours in, at the last cycle of your night, it will be REM dominant, so you get very little slow wave sleep, but you get a lot of REM. So the distribution of sleep stages changes throughout the night. So when I say these stages do different things. So for example, things like there's certain hormones or like cytokines or inflammatory factors, things like that are selectively secreted in certain stages. So that individual who is sleeping for 90 minutes is probably, or 2 hours, is probably going through all the stages. So they are getting restorative sleep. And the longer you are sleep restricted, we know that you get a bit of like a slow wave rebound. So you get a lot more slow wave sleep, which is like your growth hormone, certain hormones, testosterone release and things like that. So that slow wave sleep, you are getting it. If you're sleeping for 90 minutes, you're not robbing yourself of restorative sleep. Far from it. You are getting that restoration. A good reason to do about a 90-minute to 2-hour sleep is that what we know is if you wake somebody up when they're in deep sleep, if they're in slow wave deep sleep, they often will report what we call sleep inertia. Very groggy, feels like your eyelids are stuck down to your cheeks. You feel like you can't grip. Your grip strength is restricted. You're just slow. You're sluggish. Now, if that's not a good recipe if you're running a race. You don't want to be slow. You don't want to be sluggish. So that is a consequence of waking up in a slow wave phase, as I say, called sleep inertia. So if we're going to nap, we want to restrict our naps to 30 minutes because we'll go into stage 2, which is not deep sleep. So when we wake up, we won't have sleep inertia. If we do that full 90 minutes, we're probably going to wake up either in REM. So we might be waking up, remembering our dreams, or we might be waking up in sort of REM, non-REM stage 1, stage 2. Again, we won't have sleep inertia. So it makes sense to have 90 minutes, but maybe not for the reasons that athlete that you mentioned reported.
That's interesting. Yeah, so there is something in that. So I was sort of was led to believe that it was always like I only had ever heard of REM sleep and then deep sleep. So for me, I always just thought that you went into deep sleep when you first went to sleep, and then REM is the time in the early hours of the morning when you're waking up, and I get all of my amazing ideas for things as I'm starting to wake up and come up with all these great things that I'm going to do, and then I'm awake. But that's interesting that you say that.
You have multiple REM periods throughout the night. They just get longer as the night goes on. So we tend to remember that we wake up, remember our dreams. We remember the dreams that occur in that final REM period. We'll be dreaming throughout the night, and you dream in others. You don't exclusively dream in REM. You dream in other phases, but we just don't remember it. We just remember that last period when we wake up. But so stage 1 sleep, stage 2 sleep, stage 3 sleep, they are physiologically different. And what I mean by that is the type of brain waves that occur in those phases are different, and they're doing different things. Like I say, there's different from the neck down. There's different physiological processes that happen in those different stages, and from the neck up, there's different things. So we know, for example, that REM sleep, when you restrict someone, you don't allow them to get REM sleep, you see, they get more irritable, they're very moody, things like memory consolidation is affected. If you don't allow people to get slow wave sleep, they don't produce things like certain hormones like vasopressin, which is maybe linked to why people need to go to the toilet, because the rehydration system is changed, but it can also be things like growth hormone and testosterone. So there are always consequences of restricting sleep.
So as far as like, if I could drill you down to an optimum kind of answer. So for the guys that are doing these long events over multiple days, would you say that there's an optimal amount of sleep that they should be trying to get? Say, for example, with the spine race, where it's literally going to take them 5-6 days to do it. Over that period, what would be the best strategy? Do you think that they should be aiming to try and get 4-hour blocks of sleep in the night, or should they be trying to get 6? Because I know, I've worked at checkpoints, and I know that the maximum amount of time you're allowed in a checkpoint is like 8 hours. So you couldn't go and have 8 hours sleep because you'd be disqualified from having so much sleep. Is there an optimal amount over a really long race like that you think would be ideal?
So it's not an answer you're going to want to hear, but impossible to. We'll go back to the shoe size. If we say the average shoe size is 8, but you're not going to then tell everyone you have to wear a size 8 shoe. You have to individualize the plan. So some people are much more robust to the consequences of sleep loss than others. So I think what I would suggest, what I'd recommend, is rather than tying yourself to a certain number, a certain strategy, I think your sleep plan over the 5-day race should be really well thought through and practiced. So I think, just like you'd be going for your long runs, and you hopefully would have a couple of practice runs leading up to it. Your sleep pattern should factor into that, and equally, you've got to then think of. I remember talking to a colleague of mine who was supporting some ultramarathon runners. I can't remember what the event in Northern Italy event. Multi-day event. And the volume of caffeine that they were giving these athletes for more of a physiological benefit, it had a huge knock-on effect on their ability to fall asleep. So you've got to think, what are you planning in terms of your nutrition strategy? It becomes a holistic plan, and sleep has to factor in. And I've seen before that sleep is sometimes a bit of an afterthought, and it's like, well, I'm just going to get the absolute minimum that I think I can get away with. And for some people, they will be able to cope with that. They will be able to say, right, I am literally going to sleep for 2 hours in a 72-hour period. And some people might be able to deal with that, but I'll wager that they will have tried that out, and they will have found a system that works for them. Some people will need more, and as much as I wish I could say, you could just do 3 hours, it won't work for some people. They will be so tired. We know that in 24 hours, some people hallucinate within 24 hours of not sleeping. They will see things. Some people, it might take 48 hours. There's so much individual variability. So yeah, unfortunately, I'd love to say here's your golden number, but it just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So it's a kind of like suck it and see sort of situation. That
you've got to think about it. You've got to plan for it. You practice it.
Yeah.
Trial and error. See what works for you, but don't leave it to the last minute. That it should be one of the first things that you're thinking about in your race plan.
Yeah, that's good. I feel better knowing that, because some of the guys that I've trained this year that have done like 24-hour races, I've had them do sort of night runs where they set off at midnight and run till like 5 o'clock in the morning, and they've kind of been like, is this necessary? And I'm like, well, if you want to know what it's like to run in the middle of the night tired, then this is perhaps what you need to be doing. And I know there's mixed sort of, you know, science on it to say that, you know, should you be doing that? Are you putting yourself in a sleep hole for the marginal gain of having that experience of doing that? But I suppose, yeah, you've got to try.
I think that's a very sensible approach. I wouldn't recommend it the day before the race or the week, or the, you know, while you're tapering. Experiment with it, you know, not a good idea. It's got to be planned well in advance, but, you know, very sensible approach to, because, and this is how it works in defense, that we train people are trained when sleep restricted, sometimes for the wrong reasons, but, you know, one of the good reasons is to realize that, you know, this is what happens to me and the people around me when they're not sleeping properly, and it allows you to understand yourself and to understand other people, and to recognize when it's happening for real. You know, if this is the danger, if you're in a, you know, very austere environment doing a multi-day race where you are in between checkpoints, you don't want people hallucinating on a cliff edge, you know, and it's potentially really quite dangerous. So, you know, from a safety critical decision making perspective, trial and error, so you know how long can you stay awake for before you start hallucinating. That's something that's useful to know, because then you can start planning that in. If you're the kind of person who is really robust and you could stay awake for 72 hours with, I mean, I'm not going to say no effect, because everyone will be affected. Great. I mean, you're probably a very, very lucky individual, especially if you're doing this type of events. But if you are the kind of person who is really, really struggling after 24 hours, then sleep is just a non-negotiable. You have to put it into your training plan or into your race plan, and it's something you say, right, I am gonna have a 3-hour sleep opportunity, and ultimately it probably will actually improve your performance, because, you know, when you wake up, you'll be more efficient, you'll be performing better.
Yeah, and making better decisions as well. That reminded me of I spoke to somebody last year at the Spine race, and he was saying how he was so tired that he found an old telephone box that had been converted. You know, they're all like, they're not telephone boxes anymore. They're either like defibrillators or they're like country, like village libraries, aren't they? We're full of books and stuff. And he was so tired that he went into the phone box and just stood. And obviously he couldn't lie down. There was no room. So he sort of leant against the side and went to sleep, of what sleep he could kind of get. And then when he couldn't get comfortable and couldn't sleep, he got out and went out, but he left his trekking poles, his hiking poles behind, and they were the only ones he'd got from that point until like the next checkpoint, which was, you know, like half a day away sort of thing. Yeah. So he was, you know, regretted that decision to sleep, but it was what he had to do at that point to get him through that next section of the race. But I suppose there's a payoff in there between having enough sleep so that you're functioning correctly and you're moving forward efficiently, but could you be having relatively too much sleep so that you're slowing yourself down?
Yeah, and that's a tricky thing, and that's where, you know, it's a similar thing that we have in defense. You know, I work in an environment where I'm trying to help people sleep when their opportunities for sleep are suboptimal, and there's an operational imperative to keep people awake. You know, there's certain tasks in the world of defense where if you fall asleep, you are putting yourself and the people around you at immense risk. And so we have to say, right, well, when sleep is not available or not optimal, what are the fatigue countermeasures? What can we do to keep people functioning and alert when you can't sleep? So yes, 8 hours sleep, or, you know, if you can get it, you should. But if you're in the middle of a race, 8 hours is not feasible. It's not going to help you win a race. So that's when you've got to think, well, what are the fatigue countermeasures? What can we do? What can we put in place that in this highly this constrained environment, this difficult situation, much like I say we face all the time in the world of defense, where the opportunity for sleep isn't there. What can we do? So we talked about napping and understanding the duration of that. Like a 20-minute nap is probably enough. Like 20 minutes will give you a bit of a boost, and maybe do that a few times. So if you can't get a consolidated 8 hours, why not say, well, I'm going to do 30-minute nap every 4 hours? It's not ideal. You won't want to do that for weeks on end, but over the course of 3 or 4 days, it will probably be okay. But you have to trial it. It is using caffeine, but again, recognizing there's a caffeine crash. It will impede your sleep. So being intelligent about when you're using these kind of stimulants. We can have these sort of fatigue risk management strategies. So as the race organizers, setting up checkpoints, but taking away decision making. So for example, I remember reading a story about one of these guys who's cycling around the world, long distance cycling, and they just don't have any decision making. Like every time they need to, any point in the road where they could go left or go right, there's somebody there saying that way. Like they just don't have any decision making responsibility because they recognize that they're impaired. So that's like a fatigue risk management strategy. So what we try and look at is rather than saying you must get 8 hours because it's just never going to happen, you start planning and you start using these fatigue countermeasures as a way of trying to optimize performance in a really suboptimal environment, if that makes sense. But it's really individual, and that's the kind of thing that working with a coach or a sleep expert, you can start to build those strategies and plans to work for the individual.
So as far as like training for that kind of thing, then is that something that you think that people could implement in their training, like train themselves over a 24-hour period to sleep for 30 minutes every 2 hours or every 3 hours, with the idea of getting their body used to that kind of cycle for when they actually go and do an event where they need to stay awake? Or is that going to put themselves in a sleep hole before an event?
So the research that's been done to this point suggests that you cannot train yourself to need less sleep. What you can do is if you put yourself in that, so over a 24-hour period, like say there's like round the world sailors do this a lot. Again, where it's a safety critical thing. If they don't monitor their vessel, there could be in real big trouble. So they will just nap. They will have these short naps, and they don't have a big consolidated block of sleep. So it is possible, but like I said, you can't do it for a prolonged period. You can't train yourself to live like that forever. But so in terms of preparing for a race, maybe trialing that system. So, a month out before the race, if you did a 24-hour sleep training, 24 hours, where you stay awake for 24 hours, but trial that napping system, you will get a feel for, can I function? Or by 3 o'clock in the morning, are you just so tired that 30 minutes becomes 4 hours? Like you just you don't wake up with your alarm. Then that tells you it's not the right system for you. So get back to the drawing board. Okay, right, maybe I need to extend that nap time. It needs to be 90 minutes, every 4 hours. So yeah, I think it's again really sensible to trial these things, with the caveat you are putting yourself into you are sleep restricting yourself. So don't drive to Dundee the next day. Just think on and put yourself in the best possible position so that you're safe. So only trial these things out when you don't need to be doing things the next day.
Yeah, brilliant. That's good advice. So I'm aware that it's getting later in the evening now, and it's getting towards my bedtime. So that, after this conversation, I don't want to be missing out on my bedtime. But for sort of your final advice then for ultra runners with sleep, optimization and for racing, what would be sort of your sort of bullet points of what you can do to optimize your sleep for training?
Yeah. Number one, while you're training, sleep is your best friend. Like, it is the in terms of the performance enhancing capabilities of sleep, there's almost nothing else that will give you that performance enhancing benefit. So we will spend a lot of time on our training programs and our nutrition plan or our hydration plan, but very few people will spend any time on their sleep plan. Yet it's so important. So my number one is that when you are training, make sure that sleep is right up there in your priorities list. Not saying you don't have to, no, you're not after perfectionism. It's not about rigidly sticking to 9 hours a night and I must be asleep by 10. It's not like that. Go to bed when you're sleepy, but don't cannibalize your sleep by watching TV or Netflix. So it should be up in your priorities list. If you're in your home environment, if you're in your bedroom where you live, think about the environment and is it conducive to sleep? And you can go online, you can look up sleep hygiene. It's common sense most of the time. If you're in a busy room, you've got a massive TV, there's loads of artificial lights, it's noisy, that's not going to be good for your sleep. So can you create a sleep haven that just means that your bedroom is the place to go and sleep? It's not the place to go and do your emails. It's not the place to go and watch TV. That's a different room in the house. Your bedroom is for sleeping. And if you try and create that environment. But let's say a lot of it is common sense. If you suspect, or the individual that you share your bed with suspects that you've got some sleep problems, go to a GP. Like I've said before, eminently treatable. Most things are treatable and reversible. So there's no point sitting in silence thinking, I've got really bad sleep, I've got insomnia, or I've got sleep apnea. There are ways of treating them. So definitely go and get those treated, and you will see the benefits.
Yeah, great advice. Yeah, thanks, Martin. I appreciate you coming on and giving us all these bits of information. I know that there's definitely a few people that are regular listeners that are going to be sort of lapping up that information about the long distance and the ways to cope with that with different sleeping strategies. So I appreciate all your advice. Is there anywhere that people can sort of come to you for resources? Whether are you on social media? What are your different handles?
I don't tend to do much social media with the nature of the job that I do, but you can get me on LinkedIn. So I am on LinkedIn, so feel free to find me on there. So yeah, it's just Martin Ian Jones.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martin. Thanks for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks.